We're talking about international real estate today, and for me, it's always an interesting topic to talk about. My family has some real estate in India, and the markets shift, the market changes based on what happens in every area of the world. And I'd definitely like to think the United States is a leading indicator of what's going to happen to the rest of the world many months later. So, international investing. Why is this so hot right now?
Well, there's two things that you could mean by that, and I only have anything to say about one of them. I don't know anything about investing any place outside the U.S. So international investors investing in the U.S. we can talk about. My company's called OwnAmerica. I don't know anything about any place else in the world. so,
Yeah.
but we do have a pretty good vibe on what investors elsewhere are looking for, where they're going, and what they're contributing to the market, specifically in residential real estate, which, as you know, is our specialty. We don't my background is commercial real estate, but I switched to residential because of the housing crisis, creating a massive opportunity, creating a wave of Wall Street interest in what is now really a new asset class, but also why I'm here, which is that the barrier to entry for residential real estate is one house. And so everyday people can apply the principles of big investors and now the technologies and the data and the techniques of big investors and apply them to the small category product. And overseas investors kind of feel the same way. They invest in all types of real estate here, but residential is resonating with a lot of them because it's the story is simple, right? I mean, there's a language barrier to a lot of these folks. There is a lack of familiarity
Hmm.
with the terrain here. They haven't really been here or only have visited, but their media comes from here. They have an understanding of the
That's right.
power of the country. They have an understanding of the power of the freedom that we have here and what being able to. This is why the idea of owning America, we talk about it all the time, that it's so powerful and we take it for granted. Well, they don't. They don't take it for granted. Depending on what you're talking about, your property rights are subject to, I dare say, whimsical changes in government policy. I know people that put their money here that are putting their money here now because they're concerned of their family's fortune, which is in businesses in their country, being nationalized and having their generational family wealth be seized. They're literally concerned about that. It's something they live with their entire lives. And so they work on getting money out and then getting it in here. Because
Yes.
here they know that the rule of law stands and that property rights stand, and the market is so robust. And so we see a growing wave of interest, but it's a complicated thing because of all the process of getting the money out, getting the money in, doing it legally, and so forth. So demand is very, very strong. Implementation is not as strong as it could be because of how complicated it is.
Yeah, I think when I think about international investors, I think they are always looking at the United States as a really good place to invest. Right, the United States is not going anywhere as a country for the next hundreds of years. Real estate here is always going to be in demand because people always want to move here, and that's a global trend anyway. Right, everybody looks at the U.S. and the type of opportunities that exist here a in a very free society. It works, right? It makes sense versus, say, China. China, you're going to have a tough time getting money out sometimes, and it's a communist government. So guess what happens? The government can say, well, you know what? We need to do these things with capital, and they'll just automatically allocate capital. So investors from these types of nations are looking at the U.S. for potential opportunities, and it makes sense. What should and what are those investors looking for? Primarily single family, primarily multifamily, commercial? What's your gauge?
Well, it's all the above. The ones that I come in contact with are single family because that's all we do. But from the standpoint of how can somebody listening to your show um, benefit from this? Like, what does it mean to them? And it's interesting. So I'll give you one case study that we are dealing with right now, and it's actually fairly common, and that is it's a high net worth Chinese family whose daughter went to school in Boston. And so they anchored themselves in Boston. They got to know Boston. They visited. They got a level of comfort there, and they bought real estate for their daughter to live in. So she was living in some pretty posh digs, I think, because it was like a $4 million condo. in downtown Boston. But that wasn't about her being spoiled. It was about them moving $4 million, all cash, moving $4 million into the United States. But what we learned, and again, this is fairly common, is that once they get their feet wet in a market, and now they want to double down. Okay, so we have an example of somebody. Chinese investors tend to like gateway cities because those are tending to be international cities. So New York, San Francisco, Miami, top three, right? Boston kind of cuts in, DC. So my story is about Boston. They now crossed our path because they said we want to move more money in. We're not going to get an $8 million condo for our daughter, plus she's graduating anyway. And here's the thing, they're not generating any yield. So this is a key point. Foreign investors' goal is totally different than domestic investors. Capital preservation is number one. Okay, they bought a $4 million condo and it's not being rented out. So it's got a negative yield. They're paying gobs of taxes. It's in Massachusetts, gobs of taxes. And yet they don't care because the money is safe. And so it's not a matter of income. What that means is that it opens up opportunities for properties that would not normally be attractive to domestic investors. And Boston is a great example. Boston, you can't generate a positive yield in Boston like you can in Dallas. You just buy a house in Dallas and rent it out, you're generating a 5 or 5.5% yield, and you're appreciating. You can't do it in Boston. The prices are too high, the taxes are too high, but these people are now looking at accumulating more real estate around the campus where their daughter went. And their mind went straight to student housing. Student housing is a good investment. Okay, you're going to have a good property manager because these places get dinged up. But just the idea that they picked, here's the key, they picked a geography. And based upon picking that geography, they're now interested in buying more. And their expectations are so much more modest than anybody else that we deal with in Boston. So if I was a Boston resident and I knew that Boston University has 60% of its students are international. I'm making that up, but I've been to a graduation there recently, and it looked like that could have been the case, okay, just based upon the crowd. So big international component. If you now know that that international component wants to park money here while they have familiarity with it, maybe that's an angle where you begin to network yourself into that area and look for investments that are going to be attractive. They have to be very turnkey. They have to be somewhat sexy. Okay, these guys don't get excited, in my experience, with 3-bedroom, 2-bath, single-family houses in Atlanta. They get excited about brownstones in Boston, though. Okay, so and because you can do a brownstone in Boston and rent it out, and you're going to make a 2% yield, but 2% yield is better than a negative 15, which is what they were getting before. It just changes all the rules. When the goal is capital preservation, it changes all the rules and makes it possible for somebody who wants to prime the pump, who wants to invest in that market for themselves and then prepare property to package up for overseas investors. It gives you a different exit strategy.
So those investors that are in the U.S., should they be looking at investments abroad? I have a feeling I know the answer to this question, but I'm asking it anyway.
It's got a totally different risk profile, you know, and I just don't know it. I don't like talking about what I don't know. There's enough to like about domestic investing, you know. So
if you
my
can't find a
advice
deal
would be,
here,
yeah, and it's just risky stuff. I mean, I hear people all the time. Oh, we decided to go and do some waterfront development in Costa Rica. Okay, I don't know anything about that. Sounds like a great place to visit. Sounds like a scary place to invest because I just don't understand the property rights. Like our property rights here are pure, right? When you purchase a piece of real estate, you get clear title. You get that title insured. I don't know that exists everywhere else. And anybody who goes international better make sure they ask questions about things that are that core. Like, does the government seize property? Okay, do I have clear title? Is there title insurance? Okay, can I finance the property?
Right.
All those questions are things we take for granted here that I don't think you can someplace else. You better have some really, really smart, experienced boots on the ground there.
You said the magic keyword there, boots on ground. If you don't have that, you're going to fail internationally. If you don't have that here domestically, I mean, you'll fail too. So make sure you have a good team wherever you go. And big takeaway, always make sure that due diligence is always performed, whether it's a market, macroeconomically, microeconomically, and then go get your boots on ground team. Greg, thanks so much. Always a pleasure.
Thank you.